Okay, so we've all been there, in a conversation with a native English speaker, and suddenly it's like they shift gears and they just like zoom off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like they hit the fast forward button.
Exactly, and you're just left there like, wait, what just happened?
Struggling to keep up.
Exactly, it can feel impossible. But you know what if I told you that there's actually like a method to the madness?
There is a method.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the world of fast native English speech.
Yeah, and we're going to break down some key takeaways from an episode of the podcast English Unlocked that you sent us.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll give you like a toolkit, to not only survive these encounters with fast speakers, but to actually start, enjoying them.
Enjoying them?
Yeah, enjoy them.
That sounds pretty ambitious, but I'm game. Let's start with like the elephant in the room, which is the speed. It feels like native speakers are just hardwired to talk at like 1,000,000 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's a common misconception for sure. It's not just about speed, actually. There are like a whole bunch of factors at play. And English Unlocked actually pointed out something really interesting, which is that even native speakers don't catch every single word.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
So it's not just me with my, learner ears missing things.
Not at all. It's more about like tuning into the most important elements and using context to like fill in the gaps. It's like a puzzle. You don't need every single piece to see the picture.
Okay. I like this puzzle analogy. I'm with you. So if it's not just the speed, then what else is going on that makes native speech so hard to follow?
Well, one of the things that they talked about was connected speech. And that's when words, particularly common words, get kind of like smushed together, like blended together. So think of gonna instead of going to, or wanna instead of want to.
Oh, yeah, those sneaky contractions. I feel like those always trip me up.
Yeah, and it's not just contractions, though. Think about the phrase, what are you doing? Native speakers will often say it more like, what are you doing?
Oh, right. Yeah. And suddenly it's not like one word that I'm missing. It's like the whole sentence has transformed into something totally different.
Exactly. And then there's also reductions, too, where words like because become cuz or him becomes him, and so on and so on. For a native speaker, it's all about efficiency and flow.
So it's like English has this like secret code that native speakers use to communicate faster.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the puzzle pieces here, but how do we as non-native speakers actually start like putting this puzzle together? Where do we even begin?
Well, that's where active listening comes in. It's not just passively hearing the sounds. It's about actively engaging with what's being said.
Yeah.
And that means asking clarifying questions when you need to and focusing on what really matters.
Yeah.
It's a skill even native speakers use constantly.
So instead of freaking out when I miss something, I should just ask.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely takes a lot of the pressure off. But how do you know what to ask about? What are the key pieces of the puzzle that you should be focusing on?
Right. Good question.
Well, think about the core building blocks of a sentence. You've got nouns, which tell you who or what verbs, which are the actions, and then adjectives, which add a little bit more flavor. Those are your keywords, your signposts in the fast-flowing river of speech.
So in a sentence like, I'm going to grab a coffee before the meeting, the keywords would be grab coffee and meeting.
Exactly. Those are the words that give you the main idea. It's about training your ear to latch onto those keywords and letting the context do the rest of the work.
That's really helpful. It's like filtering out the noise and tuning into the signal. But how do we actually train our ears to do that?
Well, English Unlocked had some good suggestions for practicing in the real world. And they talked about using movies, TV shows, podcasts, things that you're probably already enjoying.
Yeah, but I feel like I often just zone out during those.
Yeah.
I'm not really actively listening.
And that's where their tip gets really interesting. Instead of just passively watching, pick one specific technique to focus on each time. So maybe one day you're focusing on identifying reductions. Another day you're trying to predict what's coming next based on the context.
So I can turn my usual entertainment into a workout for my listening skills. I like it.
Exactly. And speaking of workouts, they also highlighted a technique called shadowing.
Oh, shadowing. Yeah, I've heard of that. I haven't really tried it, though. What is it? It's basically like mimicking a native speaker, right?
That's the basic idea. You pick a short audio clip, maybe from a podcast or a news report, and you listen to a sentence. Then you pause it and you try to repeat it, matching not just the words, but also the speaker's rhythm, their intonation, even their energy.
So it's not just about like parroting the words, it's more about embodying the speaker's style?
Yeah.
I like that. It seems like a fun way to get a feel for the natural flow of English.
Absolutely. And English Unlocked made a point of saying that it's also a really effective way to improve your pronunciation and your overall speaking fluency as well.
Okay, I'm adding shadowing to my to-do list for sure. But even with all of these techniques, It's easy to get discouraged when you feel like you're constantly lost in these fast conversations.
Yeah, the mental game is huge. You're absolutely right. And English Unlocked had a really great perspective shift on this. Remember how we talked about native speakers not catching every single word?
Yeah, that was mind-blowing for me. It makes me feel a lot less alone in this struggle.
Exactly. It's normal to miss things.
Yeah.
It's not a sign that you're failing. It actually means that you're engaging with the language deeply enough to notice these nuances.
That's a much more empowering way to look at it. But how do we actually shift from feeling overwhelmed to feeling empowered in these fast-paced moments?
Well, one of the things they suggested was to reframe mistakes as opportunities to learn. Every time you notice a pattern or you figure out a phrase you didn't understand before, that's a victory. It means your brain is making connections and your skills are growing.
So instead of beating myself up for not understanding, I should be celebrating the fact that I'm picking up on these little details.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important point they made. Learning a language is a journey. It's not a race.
It's so easy to compare your progress to others, though, and that can be really discouraging.
It's natural to compare, but in language learning, it's kind of a trap. Everybody learns at their own pace. The important thing is that you're putting in the effort and that you're celebrating your wins.
I need to tattoo that on my forehead. That's a great reminder.
Yeah.
So what are some other small victories we can celebrate on this journey of understanding fast native speakers?
Well, besides catching those reductions and mastering shadowing, there's a whole world of slang and idioms to explore.
Yeah. Oh, slang. That's a whole other level of complexity. It's like I always feel like I'm one step behind when it comes to slang.
And that's where the English Unlocked hosts gave some really good advice. Instead of trying to memorize every single slang term, they said to focus on understanding the context and the speaker's intention.
So it's about looking at the bigger picture and not getting hung up on individual words that I might not know.
Exactly. And they also encouraged listeners to not be afraid to ask for clarification when they hear a slang term they don't understand.
That's a really good point. Sometimes I feel embarrassed to ask. But you're right, it's better to ask than to just stay confused.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Most native speakers understand that slang can be tricky for non-native speakers, and they're usually happy to explain.
So it's about embracing the learning process and not being afraid to ask questions. I'm starting to feel like I'm getting a handle on this whole fast speech puzzle. But there's still one thing I'm wondering.
What was that?
You mentioned at the beginning that we might even learn to enjoy listening to fast native speakers. How is that even possible?
Well, think about it this way. Fast speech is often a reflection of passion and excitement, a deep connection to the language,
That's true. When someone's really passionate about what they're talking about, they tend to speak more quickly.
Exactly. So what if instead of seeing fast speech as a barrier, you saw it as a sign of mastery, something to aspire to?
Wow, I never thought of it like that before. Instead of being intimidated, I should be inspired.
Exactly. And as you keep practicing these techniques and getting more comfortable with fast speech, you might actually find yourself starting to appreciate the beauty and the fluency of it.
I'm willing to keep an open mind, but I think I need a little more convincing. What are some other ways that we can shift our perspective and start to see fast speech as a positive thing?
Well, think about it like music. A really fast-paced song can be exhilarating. It's full of energy and emotion. It's the same with language. Fast speech can convey a sense of urgency, excitement, even humor.
Yeah, I can see that. And I guess it also shows a certain level of confidence and mastery of the language, right?
Exactly. And as your own fluency improves, you might even find yourself naturally adopting some of those rhythms and speeds in your own speech.
That's a really encouraging thought. So maybe instead of dreading fast speech, we should see it as like a goal, something to strive for in our own language journey.
Precisely. It's all about reframing your perspective and seeing the beauty and the complexity of the language, even when it feels challenging.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel here. But before we get too carried away, I think we need to take a step back and talk about some practical strategies for those times when we do feel overwhelmed. What do you think?
You're right. We shouldn't just gloss over the challenges.
So what kind of strategies are you thinking about? Well, sometimes when I'm in a conversation and it starts to get really fast-paced, I kind of freeze up. I don't know what to do or how to get back on track.
What advice would you give to someone in that situation?
That's a great question. And English Unlocked actually had some helpful tips for those moments. One of the things they talked about was the importance of body language. Even if you're not understanding every word, nodding your head, making eye contact, using facial expressions to show that you're engaged can go a long way.
So even if I'm feeling lost, I should still try to show that I'm following along.
Exactly. It lets the other person know that you're listening and trying to understand, even if you need a little help.
Right. And it kind of takes the pressure off of me to have to understand every single word perfectly. Exactly. And speaking of taking the pressure off, they also talked about not being afraid to ask for clarification.
I think we touched on that a little bit earlier, but it's definitely worth repeating because sometimes I feel like I'm being annoying if I ask too many questions.
I get that. It's a common concern, but it's really important to remember that asking for clarification shows that you're actively listening and that you're genuinely trying to understand. It's a sign of respect for the speaker, and it shows that you're committed to learning.
You know what? I think sometimes I let my fear of seeming incompetent get in the way of my learning. But you're right, it's much better to ask than to pretend like I understand when I don't.
Exactly. And most native speakers are happy to slow down or clarify what they mean if you ask politely.
Okay, so don't be afraid to ask for help. Got it. Are there any other strategies that we can use in those moments of overwhelm?
Well, another thing that English Unlocked suggested was to focus on just one or two key words at a time. Instead of trying to grasp the entire sentence, try picking out those most important words and using those to piece together the meaning.
Kind of like we were talking about earlier with the grab coffee meeting example.
Exactly. It's all about breaking down the information into smaller, more manageable chunks. And remember, even if you don't understand every single word, you can usually get the gist of what's being said by paying attention to the context and the speaker's tone of voice and their body language.
It's like being a detective, piecing together the clues to solve a mystery. I like that.
Exactly. And the more you practice these strategies, the more confident you'll become in navigating these fast-paced conversations.
This is all great advice. I'm feeling much more prepared to tackle fast speech now. But before we move on, I want to touch on one more thing that I think is really important, and that's mindset.
Absolutely. Mindset is crucial in language learning.
We've talked about it a little bit already, but I think it's worth emphasizing again. It's so easy to get discouraged when you feel like you're constantly struggling to keep up.
It's true. And the English Unlocked host actually made a really good point about this. They reminded listeners that even native speakers sometimes have to ask for clarification or rewind what they're listening to.
It's so reassuring to hear that. It's like even if you're a native speaker, you're not expected to be perfect all the time.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the idea of reframing mistakes as learning opportunities. Every time you have to ask for clarification or you miss a word, it's a chance to learn something new.
So instead of beating myself up for not understanding, I should be celebrating the fact that I'm pushing myself and expanding my skills.
Exactly. And remember, language learning is a journey, not a race. Focus on your progress, not perfection, and celebrate all those little wins along the way.
That is a great reminder. I think I needed to hear that today. So to sum it all up, it's about reframing our perspective on fast speech, focusing on the key elements, and using specific strategies to help us navigate those challenging moments.
Exactly. And the more we practice these techniques and adopt a more positive mindset, the more confident and fluent we'll become in our English communication.
I'm feeling much more empowered to tackle fast speech now, but I'm also curious to hear more about those more advanced techniques that you mentioned earlier, like shadowing. I think those could really take my listening skills to the next level.
Absolutely. Let's dive into those in more detail after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's unpack this whole shadowing thing a bit more.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's more than just like mimicking, right? It's about like embodying the speaker's essence.
So like method acting, but for language. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. How do we choose the right material for shadowing, though?
Well, English Unlocked recommended starting with audio that's clear and well enunciated. So think like podcast designed for learners or news reports, maybe even audiobooks narrated at a moderate pace.
Okay, so start with like the clean version before jumping into those like super fast conversations.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But how long should these clips be? I don't want to overwhelm myself right out of the gate.
Yeah, no, definitely start small. Even just a sentence or two is enough. You listen carefully, trying to absorb not just the words, but the pauses, the little inflections, the changes in pitch. And then you hit pause and you try to repeat it all.
Okay, so it's like I'm taking a mental snapshot of their voice and then trying to like develop that image. That's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah, I like that. And don't worry about being perfect at first. It's more about getting a feel for the rhythm and the intonation, building those muscle memories in your mouth.
This is all making sense, but I'm already feeling a bit self-conscious. What if I sound ridiculous trying to copy someone else's voice?
Oh, I totally get that. It's natural. But here's the thing. The English Unlocked folks talked about how when we shadow, our brains are actually working really hard to process those sounds, the way the mouth moves the airflow. It's like a workout for your whole speech system.
So the point isn't to become a perfect copycat. It's more to use it as a tool to improve my own pronunciation and flow.
Exactly. And they highlighted a key benefit too. Shadowing can really help bridge that gap between understanding passively and actually speaking. You're not just hearing the language anymore. You're feeling it. You're experiencing it from the inside out.
Okay, yeah, I'm sold on shadowing now. I can totally see myself like shadowing some captivating storyteller or maybe even a comedian, all that richness just like seeping into my own English.
That's the spirit. And remember, consistency is key. Even just a few minutes of shadowing each day can make a big difference over time.
It's like any skill, right? Practice makes progress. But speaking of progress, I think it's easy to fall into this trap of thinking that fluency is like this linear path, and if you're not constantly moving forward, you're failing.
That's a really common trap. And English Unlocked actually presented a different way of looking at it. They compared language learning to exploring a huge, complex city.
Oh, a city. That's interesting.
Yeah, they said, imagine you start in one neighborhood, right? You get familiar with the streets, the shops, the rhythm of life there. But then you venture into a new district, and suddenly things feel different, maybe even a little disorienting.
Yeah, and that disorientation can make you feel like you've taken a step backward, even though you're really just experiencing a new part of the city.
Exactly. And it's the same with language learning. You might feel super confident in one situation, like ordering food at a restaurant, but then struggle to follow a fast conversation about politics.
So those moments when I feel lost aren't signs that I'm failing. They're just indicators that I'm entering a new district in my language journey. That's a really helpful way to look at it.
It is. And the English Unlocked team emphasized that each new district you explore, every tough conversation you navigate, it all adds to your understanding of the city as a whole. It makes you a more seasoned traveler, a more adaptable explorer.
I love that analogy. It makes the learning process feel less intimidating and more like an adventure.
Exactly. And like any good explorer, you need the right tools and the right mindset for the journey. We've talked about shadowing active listening, focusing on keywords. Those are like your compass and your map.
And our positive mindset, our willingness to embrace those challenges and learn from them. That's like our adventurous spirit.
Exactly. So the next time you're in a conversation and the pace picks up and you feel that wave of panic, remember, you're not lost. You're just venturing into a new district. Take a deep breath, use your tools, and enjoy the exploration.
I love that. That's brilliant advice. I'm feeling way more confident and excited about this journey now. But I have another question. Is there anything else we can learn from native speakers beyond just understanding their fast speech?
That's a really good question. And it actually ties into something that English Unlocked talked about. It's the idea that fluency isn't just about words and grammar. It's about connecting with the culture that's behind the language.
Oh, that's interesting. So how does that relate to observing native speakers?
Well, they pointed out that by paying attention to how native speakers interact, their humor, their body language, even their silences, you can pick up on a lot of the cultural nuances of the language.
So it's like those unspoken rules, the things you won't find in a textbook.
Exactly. For example, in some cultures, it's polite to interrupt a lot as a sign that you're actively listening. While in other cultures, it's considered rude.
Oh, yeah. Or like how some cultures are very direct and others rely on indirect communication. It can be a minefield for sure.
It can. And that's why observing native speakers in their natural environment, so to speak, is so valuable. It's like an immersion course in the cultural side of the language.
So instead of just focusing on the words, I should also be paying attention to the whole package. The body language, the tone of voice, those unspoken cues. It's like becoming a cultural detective.
Exactly. And the more you observe, the more you'll start to pick up on those subtle nuances that really bring the language to life.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm starting to see that fluency isn't just about speaking perfectly. It's about understanding the culture and the context behind the words.
Exactly. And that's what makes language learning so fascinating and rewarding. It's a journey of discovery, not just of words and grammar, but of different ways of thinking and being in the world.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. It's like learning a language opens up a whole new world of possibilities, not just for communication, but for understanding and appreciating different cultures.
Absolutely. And it's a journey that never really ends. There's always more to learn, more to discover, and more ways to grow.
That's exciting and a bit daunting at the same time. But I think that's part of what makes language learning so enriching. It's a constant challenge, but it's one that keeps us engaged and keeps us curious.
Exactly. And that curiosity is what drives us to keep pushing ourselves, to keep exploring, and to keep discovering new ways to connect with the world around us.
Speaking of connecting with the world, I'm curious to get your thoughts on something we haven't really talked about yet. Accents.
Accents. Such a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of language learning.
we've been focusing on understanding fast native speakers, but accents can add another layer of complexity, even when people aren't speaking quickly.
You're absolutely right. Accents can definitely have a big impact on pronunciation, intonation, even the rhythm of speech.
And I think a lot of learners, myself included, can feel intimidated or discouraged when they come across an accent that they're not used to.
I totally understand. It's like encountering a new dialect, a new way of shaping the sounds of the language.
Exactly. And it can be tough to know where to even begin when it comes to understanding different accents.
Well, the English Unlocked episode had some great advice on this. They really emphasized the importance of exposure.
Exposure. So just listening to as many different accents as possible.
Exactly. The more you expose yourself to different accents, the more your ear gets used to the variations in pronunciation and intonation.
So it's like training your ear to recognize those patterns and those nuances.
Exactly. And they gave some fun suggestions for doing this, like watching movies or TV shows from different English-speaking countries.
Or listening to podcasts hosted by people from different regions. That's a great idea. I love podcasts, so I could definitely work that into my routine.
And don't forget about music. Music is a fantastic way to expose yourself to different accents and different rhythms of speech.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I never thought about it like that. But it makes sense. Music is full of language, and the lyrics are often sung with very distinct accents.
Exactly. And what's great about using music is that it's enjoyable. It's engaging. You're not just passively listening. You're experiencing the language through the melody and the rhythm.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off. It feels less like studying and more like just having fun.
Exactly. And speaking of fun, the English Unlocked team also suggested a game you can play to improve your accent recognition skills.
Oh, a game. Tell me more. I'm always up for a good language learning game.
They called it the accent guessing game. Basically, you listen to a short audio clip of someone speaking with a certain accent, and you try to guess where they're from.
That sounds like fun. And a good way to test your knowledge and really pay attention to those subtle differences between accents.
Exactly. You can find tons of resources online for this type of game, or you can even make your own using clips from movies or TV shows or podcasts.
That's a great idea. I'm going to have to try that. I'm already feeling more confident about tackling different accents. But before we move on, I want to talk about something that I think a lot of learners struggle with, myself included, and that's self-criticism.
Ah, yes, the inner critic. It can be a tough opponent in language learning.
It really can. It's so easy to compare our accents to native speakers and feel like we don't measure up.
I know. And English Unlocked had a really insightful perspective on this. They reminded listeners that everyone has an accent, even native speakers.
Yeah, that's true. We tend to think of accent as something that only non-native speakers have, but really everyone has their own unique way of speaking.
Exactly. And they stressed that having an accent isn't something to be embarrassed about. It's something to celebrate. It's part of your identity, your personal history, your journey with the language.
That's such a great way to think about it. It takes the pressure off and allows us to embrace our accents as part of who we are.
Exactly. And they encourage listeners to focus on clarity and comprehensibility rather than trying to achieve some perfect native-like accent.
So it's more important to be understood than to sound exactly like a native speaker.
Precisely. As long as you're communicating clearly and confidently, your accent is just a part of your unique voice.
That's so freeing. I think I've been so focused on getting rid of my accent that I forgot to appreciate it for what it is, a reflection of my own journey with the language.
I love that. And it's something the English Unlocked team really emphasized. They said that embracing your accent can actually make you a more interesting and engaging speaker.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, they pointed out that having an accent can make you more memorable, more distinctive. It can also be a good conversation starter, a way to connect with people who have a similar background or language experience.
You know what? I think I've been so worried about fitting in that I haven't considered the benefits of standing out.
Exactly. And the English Unlocked folks really drove home the point that confidence is key. When you embrace your accent and you speak with conviction, people are more likely to focus on what you're saying rather than how you're saying it.
That is so empowering. I think I'm starting to see my accent in a whole new light now.
That's amazing. And remember, the journey of language learning is all about growth and self-discovery. Embrace your accent, celebrate your progress, and never stop exploring the richness of the English language.
This has been such an insightful and inspiring conversation. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of what it means to unlock fluent English.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And remember, every conversation is a chance to learn and grow. Embrace the challenges, stay curious, and enjoy the journey.
And to all our listeners out there who are on this journey with us, keep practicing. Stay curious and don't be afraid to embrace your unique voice.
Absolutely. And remember, the world is full of amazing conversations just waiting to happen. Go out there and explore them.
Wow, I feel like we've really covered a lot of ground today. You know, it's amazing how much there is to unpack when it comes to something we often just take for granted, which is understanding each other.
Yeah, you're right. We tend to get caught up in the mechanics of language, but the real magic is in those cultural nuances, the individual voices, the diversity of expression within English,
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things I'm taking away from our conversation today is this idea of shifting our perspective on fast native speakers. So instead of seeing them as like a hurdle, we can start to view their fluency as something to aspire to, a sign of mastery that we can work towards.
Exactly. Remember that analogy from the English Unlocked episode about the fast-paced song?
Yeah.
Once you learn the steps, you just can't help but move to the rhythm.
Right.
Same with language. As you get more fluent, that quick flow, it becomes less of an obstacle and more like a familiar dance.
Okay, I'm officially changing my mindset from fear to fascination. I like that. But I'm curious, is there anything else we can learn from observing fast native speakers besides just their speed and pronunciation?
That's a really good question. And it actually ties into something English Unlocked brought up, which is that fast speech is often a reflection of being really engaged with a topic.
So it's not just about being able to talk quickly, it's about being so passionate and knowledgeable that the words just come out naturally.
Exactly. Think about a time when you were super excited to share a story or explain something you're really into. Didn't you naturally speak a bit faster, like the words were just tumbling out as you tried to convey all that enthusiasm?
You know what? That's so true. I've always been so focused on the technical part of speaking quickly that I never really made that connection to passion and engagement.
And that's what I find so inspiring about observing fast native speakers. It's like a reminder that fluency isn't just about technical skills. It's about connecting with the language on an emotional level, letting yourself get carried away by your thoughts and ideas.
I love that image of getting carried away. It's like surfing on a wave of language.
Exactly. And like surfing, it definitely takes practice and skill to ride those waves smoothly. But when you can, it's an amazing feeling.
So instead of feeling intimidated by fast native speakers, we should actually try to tap into that same energy and passion in our own conversations.
Exactly. It's a powerful shift in perspective for sure.
It is. And it reminds me that language learning isn't just about memorizing rules and vocabulary. It's about connecting with the heart of the language, the energy and the emotion that bring it to life.
Beautifully said. This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like we've gained a whole new understanding of what it really means to unlock fluent English.
Me too. And to all our listeners out there, the next time you find yourself face-to-face with a fast native speaker, don't panic. Just think of it as an invitation to step onto the dance floor, to feel the rhythm of the language, and express yourself with confidence and joy.
That's a great way to put it. Happy learning, everyone.
Yes, happy learning.